All right, let's take a look at how to work with forms. All right. So let's consider that right now we have an array of modules, right, that we are storing in a local state variable that contains a modules attribute with an array of objects. And then we have a render list of modules that maps, iterates over that array, right, and it concatenates several module list items. Yes? And so that's what we have so far. And what we'd like to be able to do is add a form element, maybe an input field, a button that we can type the title of a new module, click on the button, and then push that element, that new object, onto the array. And hopefully the magic of React will see that the state has changed, and it will render the new array. It will iterate over it again. All right, so let's focus on the input. So let's add at the top of our list an input field. Let's see at the module list. In the module list, this is what we're rendering, right? We have a UL, we have the module list. So let's add the input field right here. Nope, copy, paste, and that hopefully renders as follows. Maybe. There it is. There's our input field. Okay. So if plus maybe a button, let's add a button at the bottom below this. This will be button, and this will be add module. And we'll say maybe class name. This will be a button primary, primary, and button. Let's see what else. Block. There we go. Yeah, there we go. So we have an input field, right, and a button. If we click on it, presumably it'll add it to the bottom. All right. So what we'd like to be able to do is as we type the input field, as we enter the value, we need to store that information of whatever you're typing somewhere. Okay, and we'll store it in the same place that we're storing our state. Right? It needs to keep track of what is the current value of that input field. Okay, so we'll add it. It could be title, and it could be an empty string. All right, so we're going to keep track. We initialize the state as the title of that module. It'll be as an empty string, and as we type something in input field, we need to update that state. Right? We need to keep track of it. All right, so let's do that. So what we'll do is that we can keep track of that by perhaps doing an event handler saying that title changed. Right? That if and then here maybe do a console log title change. So as we type at the keyboard, we would like to be able to notify and keep track of what the value of that input field is, right? So that input field, we can say, well, on change, if it changes, call this dot title changed. Okay, and we can look at the console. So as we type, this is not rendering. Why is it not? Oh wait, is it? Okay, there it is. Okay, so it is. Notice that it's being called right here. Right, title change is being called every time I type something. Notice that it's being called. Yes. Right. So it is being called. Notice that if you put a parentheses like this, what you're doing is that when the component is rendered, you are immediately calling that function, and then never again. Right? It's called once. Instead, here what it says is do not evaluate this. Right? Do not evaluate this function up until the actual value changes. Okay. All right. So what do we want to do? We want to pass along also the event that. So when on change is a low-level JavaScript attribute, right? That allows you to bind the onChange event handler to any function that you want to call. Right? So it's definitely calling it. So this is the low-level JavaScript also sending us the low-level event. Right? and we can print out that event. We can print it out. There it is. There's our event. If we open it up, there's a couple things in here. In particular, there's a target. The target is bound to the object that generated this event. Right? So if we print .target, notice that it's bound to the input field. Right? So if we hover over it, notice that it highlights the input field. And we can then perhaps retrieve the value of that input field. Right? So that if I type, notice that I'm grabbing that information on the console. Yes? All right. So what we could do is take that value and update the state. We can update that title there. We can change it. And then when we change it, there's an API for that. We can say this dot set state. And set state takes a JSON object that tells me, what do you want to change? Probably you don't want to change the entire state. Probably you just want to change a substate, a subset of the state. In particular, I only want to change the title. I only want to change the title, and I want to set it to its new value, whatever the event.target that value is. Everybody okay? All right. So if I refresh, presumably I'm changing that state. Oh, oops, sorry. Can I? Oh, one more thing. Sorry. As I mentioned last week, this keyword behaves funny in JavaScript. It doesn't behave like in Java, referencing always the instance of the object. It references different things depending on the scope. Oftentimes, it references the current either function or object that generated this event, right? So to get around this inconsistency of how to interpret this, what React does is that it allows you to bind the meaning of this to something fixed, so that there's only one interpretation of the keyword this throughout the entire component, right? So the way we do this is that we say this dot title change says, hey, that function, right? That function, we're going to bind it so that it stays always the same. It has the same meaning. Where is it? So that's it's this one right here. It's this title change dot bind the value of this. So that now, whenever we go into that function, the only meaning of this will be the meaning when the component was being instantiated. Right? The meaning of this here, when the component was being instantiated, was the instance of the module list. Right? And that's the meaning I want throughout the component, throughout the life cycle of the component. Whenever I say this, I mean the instance of the component. I don't mean the function that I'm curling in. I mean the instance of the component. So by doing this, now there's no inconsistency, right? What we mean by this right here. We mean the value of the component. Okay. So let's go back. All right. So I'm typing, but nothing's happening because I'm just setting the state. Yes. Not all of them. Only when you need to know the value of this. When it's ambiguous. When the value of this is ambiguous.
And those event handlers, are those technically functions?
Which event handlers?
Like title change.
I called it title. You can just call it whatever you want, right? It's your function, and you just happen to be calling it on change. Right? We happen to be calling it, right? Typically, it would be if you have many attributes changed simultaneously, you might have form changed, right? So there might be a whole bunch of input fields that might have changed, right? But you call only one function that you notify, hey, something changed, right? As opposed to per input field. Okay. All right. excellent. So we did that. Just to verify that indeed we are rendering this, we could perhaps right above this, we could render perhaps the value of this dot state dot title. So I am changing the value of state of that title that is in the state. Yes, and initially, notice that there's nothing under module list. Well, actually, I could initialize it. I could initialize the title to be some dummy module title. Yes, and notice that it renders, right? Because I am rendering it right here. See that? H2 this dot state dot title. Make sense? Everybody okay? But the state of that title is going to change as I type. As I type, the state of that title changes, and ideally, it would change also, right, wherever it's being referenced. In this particular case, it's being referenced where? It's being referenced right here. So wherever it's being referenced, right, I'd like everybody to be notified, hey, the title changed. You need to change the DOM. Right? You need to change the user interface. Right? So indeed, if I type in, notice that indeed it propagates the changes across the DOM. Right? Wherever the dot title is being referenced, even if I have it referenced in many places, maybe down here under the button, I might have a paragraph. Oops. We might have this dot state dot title. Right? Notice that it renders in several places, down here and up here. And wherever I type, anybody who's referencing that state variable is being notified that it needs to change. And same thing with the array. Right? If I change that array, okay, and I add a new element or I remove an element, okay, anybody who's referencing that array, right, will be notified and says, hey, you need to update yourselves. Right? You have to. So that's what React is based on, right? On listening for state changes. Oftentimes, you're working on your work and something's it's not responding. It's typically because there's no explicit change on the state. Right? You have to make sure that if you want the user interface to re-render, is you have to forcibly cause a change in the state. Right? Because that's the only thing that will cause React to re-render the user interface. Okay. All right, excellent. So let's see, what else? All right, so we can set that. What we'd like to be able to do now is that once we know the title of the module, whenever we click on the button, yes. Yeah, all these could be arrow functions. Yeah. Yep.
Because when you use an arrow function, you don't need to bind it, right? You need to bind it inside the constructor.
In the constructor?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I haven't tested that. Probably yes. Okay. All right. Yeah. So it's already bound if it's an arrow function. All right. So the button, when I click on the button, what I'd like to be able to do is notify that I want to add this new element, this is new module to the array that we already have, right? The state module right here. Right, modules over here. So what we'll do is that we can declare an on-click and bind it to a function such as create module. Right? Let's see. We'll say go to the on-click on the button. Where's the button? Here it is. So we'll bind it right here. It says on-click this dot create module, and let's use an arrow function for that. So let's see, in here we'll say create module. Like this? Yep, okay. And in here we can then reference the state the staging there, and what we could do is create a new object, a new JSON object that might represent that module, right? And then we can push it into the array. Right, so so in here we would reference this and say this dot set state. And the only state that we want to change is in this case, is the array there, right? The array of modules. So this would be modules, right? Which would be the value of the current state, and then pushing the array of the object. Did I go over spread function? I haven't gone over spreaders. Well, I'll go over spreaders a little later. Let's see, we could, I can't do spreaders yet. I'll do spread a little later. All right, so right now the create object, we can take a look at the value of the, let's see if we can access the console log, the current title. So this dot state dot title. So hopefully we can access that in here. And so if we type, we do add modules, notice that we have the value of the modules. We can also print out the current set of modules that we have. Right, notice that it prints out the value and also the list of all the modules in there. Right, so we can manipulate that and push a brand new object in there and then change the state. Right, so we can create a brand new module, so var new module that has a title, a brand new title with this dot state dot title, and then we can take the modules and we can push a new module in there and set the state. With the new this dot state dot modules. Right, notice that it adds it at the bottom, right? So what it did is that it created a brand new object, right, with the title, and then just added to the array, pushed it to the array, and then notified the component that the state had changed, right? And then it notifies the DOM that needs to be re-rendered, right? And then it adds it. Notice that without having to re-render the original modules that were there, there was no need to throw away the entire page and just re-render the whole thing. It only added this one at the bottom. Make sense? All right. Okay. Excellent.